Hi, I'm not Indy, and this is another exciting episode of Out of the Trenches, where I sit here in the chair of wisdom to answer all of your questions about the First World War.
Dark Legacy writes, for Out of the Trenches. Hey Indian team, greetings from London. I'm a huge fan of the show, and I can tell everyone works very hard. My great-grandfather fought in the British Royal Marines in the Second World War, and thus I wish to join the Royal Marines also. Okay. My question is, what was the role of the Royal Marines in World War I, and did any other nations have Marines? And if so, how were they used and where were they deployed? Regards, Louis Prunty. That's an interesting last name, isn't it? Well, Louis Prunty, before the outbreak of the Great War, most Royal Marines served on ships of the Royal Navy, accompanying them into conflict zones of the Empire and traditionally manning the aftermost gun turrets, right? An active force of Royal Marine Light Infantry was formed after the first concepts of naval landings were introduced. Those Marines were pretty much an amalgamation of Navy sailors that could take over the role of light infantry in concert with light artillery pieces if needed. They saw limited action in the Boer Wars and more extensively in the Boxer Rebellion, actually. And as the Great War broke out, they pretty much went where the Navy went, most notably at Gallipoli, where they were the first and the last on the beaches all over the Dardanelles. Their expertise in amphibious warfare was, well, it was needed to consolidate the beachheads before the regular infantry could be landed. Winston Churchill wanted to quickly expand the expeditionary force in August 1914, as he amalgamated forces from the Royal Marines and surplus of naval personnel into the 63rd Division. These fought during the siege of Antwerp alongside its Belgian defenders. The Royal Navy Division, well, it's actually a pretty interesting thing, as they were kind of in between the Army and the Navy, right? Their uniform was navy blue with only splashes of khaki. They were allowed to grow beards, but they only received naval pay for a long time, which was less than Army pay. To your second question, yes, every Navy fielded some sort of Marines. Like the Royal Marines, they had a history of fighting overseas in smaller skirmishes. French and German soldiers fought and safeguarded the beaches of Flanders, and Russian Marines in the defense of the Baltic and the Black Sea, for example. Now, we'll talk about U.S. Marines and the events of Zeebrugge in time. Ashley McDonald says, hey Indian team, question for Out of the Trenches. I remember reading somewhere that most soldiers would not actually try to kill anyone at the front. Is it true that most were passive bystanders and life at the front was portrayed differently through media since World War I? I understand that several million people died, but most of that would be by shelling and many, although less, fewer, by machine gun fire. Is it true that deaths by individual soldiers by, for example, rifles and bayonets were uncommon? That, although it might not seem like it, is actually a really difficult question to answer. I'll try anyhow. Well, it is true what you say, that most soldiers were killed by explosives and machine gun fire, a lot more than were killed, in hand-to-hand combat, for example. One extremely cynical statement in Pierre Berton's Vimy tells us that no man was killed with the bayonet in the Great War unless he already had his hands up. And there is some truth in that. The media had changed its views on the Great War. It has over the last 100 years a lot of times. Directly after the war, it was popular to see every soldier as the brave frontline fighter. In the 1970s, that had changed to see everyone as a tragic victim of the war. I'm pretty sure it was John Keegan who brought the discussion back to the actual experience of the soldiers in combat. If you read the accounts of soldiers who experienced combat in the front lines, they paint you a fairly distinct picture. The excessive use of the hand grenade, as well as the mechanical spreading of bullets by the machine gun, were signs of an impersonal, dehumanized war. Most soldiers on all sides, especially among the conscripted, were not natural-born killers, which is what you might imagine. Many men who didn't have the courage or the ferocity to kill someone, sure, they stayed back in the advance or only followed hesitantly. The close-quarter combat, where you actually see and touch your enemy, became as the war went on, more and more the trade of specially trained and psychologically capable shock, storm, and assault troops. But at the end of the day, it was the soldier's job to fight and kill with the rifle and bayonet, and passivity in combat meant death. Adams Visulis writes, "Hi, I have a question for Out of the Trenches, but I want Flo to answer this." Okay. Sim Salabim!
Okay, I myself as Latvian know about Latvian units called Strelnieki, which were one of the best Russian military units and who might be one of the reasons Bolsheviks won the Russian Civil War. Anyways, my question is, did Lithuanians and Estonians have such units in World War I? Thank you for a good show, and Flo, you're awesome. Thanks. So, the Strelnieki, or better known to the rest of us as the Latvian Riflemen, were a unit to the defense of the Latvian homeland. The Latvians were certainly among the most motivated soldiers since they fought to defend their homeland from the invaders, you know. They knew the territory, they had experience in winter camouflage, and they established a defense line along the, I think it's the Daugava River, and barricaded the swampy ground of the region. They most famously formed the vanguard during the so-called Christmas Battle of 1916, but after their first heroic successes, they suffered heavy casualties, when the Germans counterattacked. That spawned heavy resentment against their Russian officers, whom they felt betrayed by, and was one of the reasons why nearly all of the Latvian riflemen went over to the Bolsheviks as the revolution and the Civil War continued. Their legacy is still deeply revered in Latvia. There are some similar military units in like the other Baltic states, I think only after the war. The Estonians established the Estonian Defense Forces in late 1918 in their War of Independence. Lithuania had the Lithuanian Riflemen's Union since 1919, which was like a paramilitary organization with strong ties to their citizenship. More similar to the Strelnieki were probably the Ukrainian Sikh Riflemen or the 4th Polish Rifle Division. So, I mean, you already know that the whole multi-ethnic composition of like the troops on like the Russian Empire side, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and to some extent also the German Empire, that led to a lot of chaos and independence movements and things like, I don't know, we also will talk about the Czech legions and everything. We definitely already finished the research for like a whole Baltic special, because there's more interesting things to say that, and I think we will film that in summer probably. So, and if you want to learn more maybe about the Cossacks before and during World War I, you can click right here for that. And if you want to read more from my social media posts, you can follow us on Facebook and on Twitter as well. See you next time.